she was dealing with really challenging home situations that any of us would struggle with. And then being a new faculty member and trying to find her foothold and was failing. And she just didn't have the support she needed. And so rather than going in that preconceived notion of you are failing, you're not going to make it. It was, wow, you're dealing with a lot. And what can we do to help you in that situation?
Welcome to Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. Today, I'm delighted to have my colleague, Dr. Catherine Krawczeski, on the podcast as we discuss why kindness is an instrumental part of great leadership. Dr. Krawczeski is a pediatric cardiac intensivist whom I first got to know when she was the director of the cardiovascular ICU at Lucile Packard Children's Hospital, Stanford. She went on from there to become the chief of cardiology at Nationwide Children's Hospital. Because of her exceptional abilities, she was quickly promoted to the chair of the Department of Pediatrics at the Ohio State University College of Medicine and physician-in-chief of Nationwide Children's Hospital. Subsequently, she was also named the chief medical officer. She is an internationally known physician and leader, and I'm delighted to have her on the show today. Catherine, great to see you, and thank you for joining me on the Science of Leadership.
Absolutely. Wonderful to be here, Tom.
Well, I'm really looking forward to our discussion today on the role of kindness in leadership. As I thought about this topic, you came immediately to my mind because I've always seen how you treat others with kindness. When you think about being kind to those you lead or others in general, what does that look like to you?
I think fundamentally it comes down to respect and respect for others. Long ago, I realized that there were other points of view, that situations were rarely black and white, and really acknowledging others' viewpoints and treating them with respect really is what to me defines kindness.
That's great. Yeah, respect, kindness and respect are certainly intimately related. You know, James Henry said, 3 things in life are important. The first is to be kind, the second is to be kind, and the third is to be kind. Nevertheless, I suspect some of our listeners may be thinking that they can't be kind because their people won't do what they're supposed to do, or they as leaders will be seen as soft or laissez-faire or something of that nature. How would you respond to folks who are out there thinking that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would say that being kind does certainly not equate to being a pushover or being unwilling to tackle challenging situations. I think you could probably attest that I am more than willing to do that. I think you can have high standards, you can implement those high standards, and you can still be kind. I found that even giving feedback on areas that people can improve can be done with kindness, and really trying to have a sense of understanding where the person is coming from.
Yeah, I agree. I have seen you be resolute, but still be kind, still be respectful. And I think that gets back to that idea that you were talking about earlier. So I'm reminded of a statement that's similar. It's in a similar vein, but meekness isn't weakness, it's strength under control. And so this idea that just because you're kind or a nice person doesn't mean that you're, as you said, a pushover or weak or things of that nature. So
Yeah, and I think that's hard to learn. It's very instinctual that as we grow in leaders, we want to tell people our opinions. We want to show that we have things under control, and it's often harder to listen, to just really listen to people, really take everything in before making those decisions. And being kind doesn't mean that you always do what the other person wants you to do. It means being respectful, maybe being thoughtful and listening to them and explaining why you came to the decision you did. And ultimately, that to me also defines that kindness. So instead of being dismissive and just saying, well, I didn't consider that, helping someone to understand why you might have made the decision that you did.
Yeah, I'm hearing valuing the other person, valuing them. This idea of respect is valuing them as a person, but then valuing their input or their thoughts, contributions. Doesn't mean that you, as you say, follow it. You don't obey it, as it were, but you take into account that this is valuable and then move forward.
Exactly.
We were saying, it doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean that you don't hold people accountable in their roles and in their responsibilities. Also doesn't mean that we remove people. It doesn't mean that we don't remove people who are failing in their roles. I think kindness is in part much more about having sort of empathetic concern and putting ourselves in their shoes. I remember something General Jim Mattis told me when I was interviewing him for my study. And he said and I'm quoting him here, would like to be remembered as someone who always found himself trying to walk in the other guy's boots for a mile before I spoke. And a mile usually takes most of us 15 to 20 minutes, even at a good clip. So stop and think before you act. And when he said that, I was really struck because typically when you say walk a mile in that other person's shoes, you don't actually think about the act of walking a mile in their shoes and how long that would take you, right? Like when you're about to inform somebody vociferously of an error they may have made or what have you, taking the time to stop and go, how might I have done that wrong? Or things of that nature, that 15 to 20 minute window there, which is a lot of time. That really, really reframed it when he told me that. And I really never considered that and found that so powerful. Any thoughts on that idea?
Yeah, no, I think that that is incredibly true. And I can think of examples of that in my own life. And it's part of that is checking our preconceived notions at the door, what our beliefs are about someone or a situation when they come in. I mean, a great example is I of course have to give people feedback all the time. And although hopefully most of it is very positive and people are doing outstanding jobs, I have been in a situation where someone was performing poorly. And it's very easy to make assumptions why somebody is performing poorly. Maybe they're lazy, maybe they don't care, maybe other things are going on. And I remember one such instance of somebody who came in and, merely my question is tell me what's going on with you. Not in an accusatory way, but tell me more about like what's going on in your life. How are things going? And she was dealing with really challenging home situations that any of us would struggle with. And then being a new faculty member and trying to find her foothold and was failing. And she just didn't have the support she needed. And so rather than going in that preconceived notion of you are failing, you're not going to make it. It was, wow, you're dealing with a lot. And what can we do to help you in that situation? And I don't know that I would have always been able to, I wouldn't have always had those skills. I might have immediately gone to this person is just not good enough. But have learned over the years, there's a reason and there's a story. And most people don't get to, high levels of where they are without being good achievers and wanting to do a good job. So there's usually a background and a story and ways that we can help. And really that's, as leaders, the best that we can do is to really promote and support the people that we're leading.
And thinking about that, maybe that story, or maybe there's another one where the fact that you were kind in your career to someone had a really tremendous positive impact, that you could see that really made a difference in them or in their situation. Do you have a good story for that?
Oh, outside of that one, I think there are many. One of the things that as leaders, particularly as we are sort of going through our careers, we don't necessarily see ourselves as leaders. And so I've been amazed over the years, and this isn't going to be a specific story, but how many times people came to me and said, I was terrified of the ICU, and you made me feel welcome, or you made me, feel like I could express my concern to you without, feeling dumb or without, feeling that you didn't care or that you weren't going to listen. And I think those things are really powerful. We don't recognize that in healthcare that there may be people who just started in the field that who may feel like they're terrified to come ask a physician a question, which we don't see because we don't see that we are scary. And sometimes we have to recognize that can be intimidating. And so being welcoming will be impactful. I mean, we have had people. I had a physician the other day tell me that she had a respiratory therapist come to her recently and tell her that during the pandemic, she was so stressed and so frustrated that she was going to quit. And she had made a decision that she was going to leave the field. And she said, I didn't leave the field because the very next day you came in and asked me my opinion and thanked me for helping with a patient who was doing poorly. And that made all the difference in the world. And I think that these things happen on a daily basis that we don't even realize the impact we have, positive or negative, on people. That can impact their decisions to stay in medicine, to leave medicine, and then obviously we hope they pay that forward.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely great example. And the fact that we don't often understand the magnitude of our wake, if you will. I tend to like to have a positive example and a negative example, and it turns out that I'm usually the one giving the negative example on my podcast, but in this one I don't really want to, but I feel obliged to share a time when I really messed it up and I was unkind, and I wish that I would have known General Mattis's philosophy earlier in life. But anyway, when I was a junior attending, I was working with a fellow, and we were going to do a transesophageal echocardiogram on one of my adult congenital patients, and this fellow was superb. I mean, he was always eager, on task, positive, helpful, energetic, respectful, absolutely tremendous. And so before the case, I told him, hey, look, do not put the probe in the patient's esophagus until I arrive. I think the patient was anticoagulated. I was worried about bleeding. I was worried about all sorts of negative consequences. And he and I had never done a transesophageal echo before, and so I wasn't really sure of his abilities. And so I was concerned, about it, and said, hey, just don't do that. I'll be there momentarily. I showed up to the room, and he had put the probe down the patient's esophagus. And I was absolutely livid, because ultimately it was my rear end on the line if something went wrong. And I made my emotions far too clear to him and everyone else involved. And in fact, it turned out that the anesthesiologist had told him to put the probe down to speed up the case. And so he was torn because I was saying one thing and the anesthesiologist was saying another, and the anesthesiologist was there in the room at that moment. So he put the probe down. And I didn't ask. I just went off and was unkind to him. I was immediately ashamed of myself, and honestly, even telling this story, I am. And I screwed that up. After the case, I apologized to him and to everyone else for my actions, and I took him aside and directly apologized to him, and we went on to work well together, including producing an important research study, and he's since gone on to great things in his career. But I really blew that. I learned from it. I haven't done anything like it since, but it still really bothers me, because that's just not the kind of person that I want to be, and certainly not the leader that I want to be.
Yeah, I think, as leaders, we all have, unfortunately, countless examples of where we mess up or say the wrong thing or where we didn't understand somebody's point of view. And I think, for me, the key point of that story, though, is that you recognized it. And, even in the moment, which honestly sometimes doesn't happen. And so those experiences help us, and they help us the next time something comes up. And so to me, that's like the stage of leadership where I've realized, despite all my leadership coaching, that I'm not always going to say the right thing, or I'm not always going to, understand the subtle signs that maybe what I'm saying isn't being heard the way I intended. Um, but I think about that, and to me, the next stage of leadership is recognizing that and being able to remedy that, and going back to somebody and saying, "Hey, I didn't like. I think that maybe what I said didn't come across the way I meant." And so I think that people recognize, people are forgiving. Although that's another aspect of kindness we haven't talked about, which is grace,
Mm-hmm.
and giving people grace. But I think that's the next step of leadership is being able to recognize when you mess up, and being humble enough and kind enough to admit to your mistakes.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a great topic. So let's pivot toward that, if we will. I try not to use pivot because it's so Silicon Valley, but let's redirect a little bit toward that just for a minute. This idea of being kind to folks when they do make mistakes, and the impact that can have um, on people. I think you hit on something that's tremendously important. The you used the word grace, forgiveness, whatever we want to say, whatever term. Certainly that can make, I mean, just thinking back in my life, when you really screwed something up, um, and somebody comes along and says, "Hey, you could have done better. We all make mistakes. Let's do better next time."
Exactly.
The impact that can have is just extraordinary.
Right. And I've seen both, right? I've seen when you have somebody who does treat you that way with grace, and that's so impactful, especially when you are a trainee or early career and you've messed up, and you messed up, and maybe it was you messed up a procedure, maybe it was you messed up a diagnosis, maybe your patient deteriorated and you didn't recognize it. Something happened, you made a mistake. But I've also seen where so I've seen where people gave grace, and that impacted that career and helped build the person, so that they said, everybody makes mistakes. You did a good job. Learn from this. It's tough, but go on. I've also seen the opposite, where they were berated and belittled for making a very similar mistakes. We have to be careful about that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you and I have been at many trainee evaluations that it can be a frenzy when fellow
Mm-hmm.
is struggling, and will somebody will bring up something that a trainee has not done well, and then somebody adds to it, and somebody else adds to it, and somebody else adds to it, and forgetting how long it took us to get to where we were. I've heard people in the cardiac ICU critique early career nurses for not understanding cardiac physiology. And I have to remind people that I didn't go into cardiology as my first fellowship because I didn't feel like I understood it. I started critical care, and during my critical care fellowship, finally got the light bulb that I understood physiology, to say, oh, I get it now. And I think, I needed all that training and that explanation and somebody to mentor me and to teach me. And so we have to remember to do that, because again, we forget, where we were at one point.
Yeah. Yeah. That is something, golly, that it really bothers me when you see that sort of blood in the water moment in those evaluations where everybody just starts heaping on. It's like, hey, 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 these folks are training. They're in training. They're not
Yeah.
cardiologists yet. They're in training, and it very much is. Often we forget. That's something I've always tried to do, like when I've worked with students, residents, and so on, was try to remember, what was it like when I was in that spot. Remember what it was like when you were in that spot, right? Like, you weren't some world expert in whatever it may be. There was a time when you had no idea which way was up, right? And that's where that person is. Meet them where they are, and then help them move forward. Um, and that is kindness, and that's so. We've been hitting on this. It's so important, because you can either build people up or tear them down. And real leaders, are about building people up,
Mhm.
helping everybody become better and get further along toward their potential. And I think kindness is intimately related to that.
I agree.
Well, let me take a moment just to hit on some of the science here. It should be obvious, hopefully, to our listeners that kindness is important, but for those who don't see it yet, I'll take a couple minutes to touch on the science supporting the positive effects of kindness in leadership. Of note, since the COVID-19 pandemic, research into leadership and organizational kindness has really taken off. If you start looking into the literature, there's far too much to cover in a short blurb here on our podcast, but I'll give a brief overview to get folks thinking about it a little bit. When leaders are kind, the workplace is kinder and less stressful. We all know the degree of stress that we've been under since the pandemic. That is, studies have shown that a leader's kindness is contagious. It affects the entire work environment. Sapala and Cameron found in their work that positive and kind workplaces are more productive. In studies by Dutton and colleagues and Frost and colleagues, kindness in organization has been found to facilitate a sense of humanity, assist healing, and nurture interpersonal connections. Frost and colleagues also found in another study that acts of compassion and kindness in organizations restore or enable a sense of kindness, belonging, and life-giving relationships among people at work. Kim Cameron and colleagues at the Ross School of Business have studied this topic for a long time, and they found that kindness in organizations leads to improved productivity and financial performance. Also, when a leader is kind to those that they lead, morale increases, absenteeism decreases, turnover decreases, and so does burnout. So all of these things that we've been overwhelmed with in organizations in the last 4 years are very positively affected by kindness. And so if for no other reason, and that's not what you and I are advocating by any means, but if for no other reason than productivity and financial interest, kindness is really something that folks need to be paying attention to and enacting.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. I mean, nobody wants to follow somebody who is berating them or is a negative influence, right? So it's you want to get on the bus of the bus driver that's happy, that greets you, that if you fall down they're going to pick you up, rather than the one who's going to shut the door on you and drive off. I think that's probably the best analogy I can come up with. But I think those things are completely true. And it's also, the other thing that they didn't mention there, and I'm guessing there's science on, is humble leadership. So that, having that leader who says, we're going to do this together, we're going to get better together, we're going to move forward together. And I can imagine that was particularly true during COVID, when it really was a sense of, we'll all do this together, we're going to learn about this together, we're going to work harder together. That made those places much better.
Yeah, indeed. On an episode some time back, okay, probably a couple months back, I was talking about a wisdom, if we want to call it that, something that I told my son as far as how to make friends and get people to like him. And I said, and it's the same thing here, make people feel good about themselves in your presence. And fundamental to that is kindness. Nobody, as you said, nobody wants to be around somebody who is a jerk. It doesn't matter how smart you are. If you're mean to people, nobody's going to want you around. And so being kind, I think, is at the heart of that.
Absolutely.
Catherine, we've covered what it means to be kind and why it's important. The question now is, what are the practical ways our listeners can develop kindness? Do you have some sort of practices that you do to help you with regard to being kind to people?
Yeah, I think it really is key to develop tools that allow us to step back and to listen to other people. That has been something that is unfortunately an acquired skill for many people. As I said at the beginning, I think many high performing individuals want to be the person in the front of the class who raises their hands immediately and who gives the answer. And so to be able to learn the skills of listening,
Mhm.
truly listening, not listening and waiting so that you can interject your opinion, but truly listening is valuable, and working on those skills. Learning to be compassionate. I think that's that humility, recognizing that all of us have messed up, and if somebody had not been compassionate to us, we might not be where we are. So, that is really important. Have insight into your own strengths and weaknesses. I think that's a key component. You talked about a little bit before your mistake at being unkind, but you had the insight. You had the insight into that was at that time an area of weakness. So recognize, you need to understand, this is what I need to work on. Recognize how you might be perceived. Be open that you
Mhm.
might not be perceived the way you think that you're being perceived. People don't always know your intent. So if you're not sure of that, ask for a 360 evaluation. Ask to see, how are you perceived? Are you coming across the way you want to be coming across? Those are really valuable. They
Yeah.
are incredibly hard. I mean, you will get feedback that maybe you don't want to hear, but is often valuable and will be impactful in your life if you can address those areas. But ultimately, with all of this, if you struggle, my biggest advice is get coaching. I think executive or leadership coaching is one of the most powerful tools in the box. I think it can
Mhm.
help us really learn how to recognize our strengths and weaknesses, how to have insight into ourselves, how to develop higher EQ if it doesn't come naturally. But it is really incredibly valuable. And coaching doesn't mean a one time session where you just vent to somebody about your life, but to really develop a relationship with a coach that you can work on situations, that you can work on your what your leadership style, how you might approach certain complex challenges within the organizations or complex people. And so I think that is really important. I mean, they talk about all the time that no pro athlete does not have a coach.
Yeah.
They're a pro athlete. They know what they're doing. And I think that pro athlete is that analogy is really good in the sense too, is that your coach does not have to be in your specialty or even to be a physician. Your
Mhm.
coach needs to understand leadership coaching, and they need to have context, and you can usually teach them context. But just as we're not going to have the NFL coach actually go out and throw the football. They just have to understand the challenges behind that. So I can't say enough. I was really fortunate in my career to have coaching. I still have coaching, and so that is something that I highly recommend to people.
Yeah, that's great. So coaching, 100% advocate for that. I've experienced it myself. Another thing that I would actually recommend folks who are in leadership positions to consider is being trained as a coach. So I underwent executive leadership coaching training, so I'm trained to be, a coach in this domain. And the practices that you have to undertake, you mentioned listening and how important listening is, and for coaching, that's pretty much what you do. You'll ask some questions now and then, but ultimately you're not giving answers, you're listening, and listening for what's important to somebody and what they may not see, and then trying to ask the right question to open the lock to get them to see it. And so I have found that that is tremendous. And here in my role, started a coaching program for our faculty in our department. So we have 6 of us who are trained in coaching, and that's deployed to all of our division chiefs and any other faculty who would avail themselves of it. And I think that's vitally important. And 360s, you're right, they can be hard. They can be hard, especially for those of us who are high performers, um, to get some hard feedback. But golly, if you really pay attention to it and invest in it with a coach who can help you, the impact of that can be tremendous. I feel like it has been for me. And so, yes, I would advocate that certainly. I've got a few other practical tips for the listeners. So earlier I mentioned Emma Sapala and Kim Cameron, and they wrote this article in the Harvard Business Review. And in it, they provided 6 characteristics of a positive or kind workplace. And I think these convey nicely to the idea of just being kind. 1, caring for, being interested in, and maintaining responsibility for colleagues and friends. So the people that you're working with, think of them in a different light. Providing support for one another, including offering kindness and compassion. You mentioned compassion when others are struggling. Number 3, really important, avoiding blame and forgiving mistakes. That, of all of them, that may be the most important, especially in high stakes environments. Number 4, inspiring one another at work. Number 5, emphasizing the meaningfulness of the work. And number 6, treating one another with respect. You mentioned that, gratitude, trust, and integrity. Now, from there, they recommended 4 ways that leaders can nurture those 6 characteristics. You ready for those?
Ready.
All right. Number 1, foster positive social connections. That translates to be friendly in a real way. Show interest in the people that you're leading. Number 2, show empathy. Ask, you said this, are you okay? How are you managing? How are things going? Something of that nature. Number 3, go out of your way to help. Number 4, encourage people to talk to you, especially about their problems. I think so often we discourage people because we're busy, or we give off the air that we're busy. Hey, how are you doing, as we run by, or we're looking at our, we're talking to them, and we're just looking at deleting emails or what, that sort of thing. But stopping and really engaging with people to encourage them to talk to you. And then, as you were saying, listen. So any thoughts about any of those
Yeah,
things?
it added a dimension that we hadn't touched on before, which is the social connection and having
Mm-hmm.
a social relationship with people that you lead or people that you are colleagues with. And that's really key. I mean, when they talk about team and team dynamics, having that sense of team is having a personal relationship, and recognizing that. And it becomes increasingly challenging, I think, currently in our day and age, where we're not in the same physical space with people always. We might meet them over a Zoom, or we might just meet them over the phone, or just know their names. But anytime we have a personal connection, it's so important, and it's valuable for having that sense of team, knowing who somebody is. And we can foster that. It's very easy to get busy and just go straight to work, shut your office door. I'm going to work. I'm going to, pound this out. You will gain a lot by chatting with people, seeing who they are. I think that water cooler talk really builds that team. It's something that we missed during the pandemic, not just the exchange of ideas, but the exchange of being compassionate and social, and that just sense of human connection that got lost. And all of that is really important. I think that's why people struggle to some extent, because it's that next manifestation of that. It's easier to be kind and compassionate to someone when you know them and you know their personal circumstance,
Sure.
and you're not going to make those assumptions. So I love these, and I think it's an important component.
Yeah. That's great. Again, you hit on so many things there. Just the struggle that we've gone through, the social disconnection that we've had, that people are now returning to and rebuilding, and water cooler. Again, just getting to know people in a real way, not just, that's Ned or whomever who works down in accounting or something, but really kind of interacting in real and human ways. So valuable. Before we close, I was just wondering, is there somebody, as you think back across your life, not just career, maybe it was somebody in your youth or something, that you would say, this person was kind of my kindness role model?
That's a challenging one, Tom. You put me on the spot. I can think of so many colleagues that have really emulated this to me.
Mhm.
I think at Stanford, Steve Roth certainly emulated that. Somebody who was
Mhm.
kind, somebody who listened. So I think there are in my youth. I probably would say my father. I think most of us would go to a parent figure to say, did they show kindness? And it wasn't just kindness towards family, because I'm hoping that most parents are kind to their family. But my dad was a small town obstetrician, and just his and so of course would tell stories about things that happened. And he always told them with great kindness and respect towards his towards his patients, towards their children, really towards their life situation. And I think that was something that was really instilled in me, is to respect everybody, that everybody was coming from a different place, and that you really could help them advance forward. And so I'm really grateful for that. But I've been really fortunate to also have some good role models professionally to show me that.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, thanks for sharing those. I always like to, you know, maybe throw a curveball in there now and then. So,
Mm.
but that's really good. As I think about people that in my life who've been kind, a number of kindergarten teachers, my own kindergarten teacher, my best friend's mom was a kindergarten teacher, the nicest, just kindest lady, never had anything negative to say. A couple of other people who are junior to me, my nephew, Isaiah, of all people on earth, I don't know that I've ever met anybody who was resolute in not saying anything negative about people. Just absolutely always kind, and will make it known, hey, to anybody who's saying negative about something, cut that out. That's not the way we should be. Just tremendous role model. And again, he's far younger than I am. And then my son, with regard to compassion and kindness, I've never, as far as just true compassion, never met anybody as compassionate as him. So there are people I look up to for kindness and compassion as role models, and some of them are not older than I am. So anyway,
It's a good lesson there too.
yeah. Well, Catherine, it has been absolutely great to get to catch up with you a bit here on this episode of The Science of Leadership. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
It's been a true pleasure, Tom.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.